Jay Gabler, Duluth News Tribune arts and entertainment reporter, back with another special episode of the DNT Minute featuring my column, Front Row Seat. Fall is book season as publishers fill the shelves with new releases hoping to catch the eyes of readers looking to curl up in the crisp fall weather with new books and hoping to land under some Christmas trees come holiday shopping season. So pretty much this month, September, my column is going to be all about books. Starting with this week's column, a review of a new memoir by Duluth-raised comedian Maria Bamford. Now, I'm going to give you a heads up. The book talks pretty frankly about the author's struggles with mental health. And the review that I'm about to read also engages those topics since they're pretty much the core of what the book is about. So the column this week, the book review, does touch on issues of mental health, including suicide. So just want to give you a heads up that that content is coming up. Maria Bamford's new book, Sure, I'll Join Your Cult, is knowingly broad-minded about what might constitute a cult, at least for the purposes of this tongue-in-cheek memoir. 3 sections detail the author's involvement with the cult of family, the cult of fame, and the cult of mental health care. Under those umbrellas fall programs including a Dale Carnegie course held in the lower level of the Duluth Public Library, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, not held in Minnesota, where only the Twin Cities are large enough to support their own Sexaholics Anonymous group, and multiple hospitalizations. Bamford, who grew up in Duluth and still returns frequently, has embraced a philosophy of radical transparency. That applies not only to mental health, but to relationships. In a chapter about her sister, she writes, "She's asked me not to talk about her in my comedy act, but a book is different." That policy of radical transparency also applies to money. Like David Byrne did in his book How Music Works, Bamford provides a line-item accounting of her cash flow. Given this is treacherous territory, Bamford introduces a series of icons to alert readers when she's engaging with touchy topics, as well as when she's breaking 12-step rules of anonymity, sharing recipes, oversharing financial information, and recycling old jokes. The system is inspired by the icons in For Dummies books, which, as the author of Sociology for Dummies, I appreciated. I feel like Bamford would be interested to know that authors who wrote For Dummies books during lockdown were duly issued bottles of Clean Hands for Dummies sanitizer. When delving into potentially triggering discussion of mental health topics, including suicide, Bamford goes a step further and formats extended passages in bold Comic Sans, a widely mocked font that resembles hand lettering. "If you don't like me personally," Bamford writes, "change all fonts in this book with your own pen to bold Comic Sans." This is the first full-length book by Bamford, who's developed an offbeat presence on stage and screen. She's popped up on shows like Arrested Development and BoJack Horseman, and starred in the 2-season Netflix series Lady Dynamite. She's best known, though, for her stand-up comedy. In addition to appearances far and wide, she's been seen on Conan, Colbert, Corden, and Leno. At the mic, Bamford performs with Paul Rubin's fierce commitment to goofy voices, but unlike the late Pee Wee Herman performer, she's never taken on a long-term alter ego that isn't some version of herself. Bamford's comedy doesn't translate into printed prose as seamlessly as that of more conversational, observational comics. Virtually every page of Sure, I'll Join Your Cult contains some words in all caps, as if Bamford is straining at the dynamic limits of the written word. An example, quote, "Wyden said hello to me, and then he called, scream in real time, even now," end quote. The book, which proceeds in roughly chronological fashion, follows a principle the author learned from memoir writing for dummies. Yes, that's an actual book. A memoir, it seems, needs to explain how the author set about getting something they want. "What have I wanted?" writes Bamford. "To be someone else entirely, someone who loves to live. How have I gone about getting that? By participating in cults." The result is a book that doesn't fit readily into any particular category of mental health memoir. Bamford ultimately describes herself as a, quote, "very, very pretty 52-year-old cis lady person with bipolar 2, BP light, and full health coverage." But the challenges she's faced are many and varied, as are the solutions she's tried. Bamford offers advice for readers who experience suicidal ideation, as she often has, but the author doesn't pretend to have arrived at a satisfactory solution. Lower the bar, she writes to people who've explored all the obvious resources to no avail. She advises calling the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, that's 800-273-8255. She continues, quote, "But if that fails, call AT&T, call Domino's, call an anti-abortion clinic, see if they're pro-life for your life." Not all the challenges Bamford describes facing are quite so dire. The funniest chapter details her stress-inducing involvement with Suzuki violin training during her Duluth youth. When people today suggest she pick the instrument back up, Bamford writes, it's like saying, "Hey, Maria, you know how you were in a toxic relationship for almost 20 years? Why don't you casually reestablish contact? Text him." Given that this book will be widely covered by national media, you may be choosing to read this review or listen to this review in the Duluth News-Tribune because you're curious about the local angle. Perhaps you've read about Bamford in the News-Tribune or in one of our predecessor publications. Bamford writes about trying to impress her mother. "Low-level celebrity? That I can deliver. Press in the Duluth Budgeteer? You got it." Bamford's take on Duluth is refreshing. She doesn't have one, really. The city is mentioned at least 20 times, but who's counting? And acknowledged as the place where she grew up, but Bamford doesn't seem to feel the need to explain Duluth to a general readership. Everyone's from somewhere, right? The Suzuki method is taught all over the world. Although Sure I'll Join Your Cult recounts a long journey through support groups and professional care with no pat resolution, it's not cynical. The book acknowledges that a human brain is a complicated thing to have, and that even if no one cult program can solve all your problems, it just might save your life. That's this week's column. You can read the column and find resources for people who are looking for some mental health help at DuluthNewsTribune.com. I'll be back next week talking about another book, a new book recounting the only recording session Bob Dylan, Duluth's own, ever did for one of his own albums in Minnesota. Hint, it was one of his greatest albums ever. And we're talking about Bob Dylan, so that's saying something. That's coming up next week. Until then, I'm Jay Gabler, Duluth News Tribune.